Well, that's a perfect segue to the next question I wanted to ask you, because it's
Yeah.
a real throwback. So way back in the day, you made a film called Ghost Ride the Whip, right? That was a whole different time. Now, I'm in the whole documentary making space. I'm part of this sort of almost like a whole new wave of just independent. You make documentaries, you throw it up, you get YouTube revenue. I really want you to break down to me what it was like for you to actually make that film back then, and just how different media, hip hop culture media was back then compared to now, and like maybe what like lessons could be learned now as far as like how things used to be done back then.
Well, I was making that film as I was launching Vlad TV. It all happened right around the same time, right around 2008. So I was already doing DVDs, like street DVDs, and I saw what was happening in the Bay. I'm from the Bay, so it was kind of a love letter to the Bay, to my home in a way. And I saw what was happening with the whole hyphy movement, with how much attention Mac Dre was getting because he had just gotten killed. And well, around that time, E40, Keep the Sneak had a huge song called Tell Me When to Go. Mac Dre, his songs were going crazy. This movie Rise just came out. I just interviewed Tommy the Clown, and we talked about how that was a big influence at that time. I knew a filmmaker named Peter Spira, and I put together this idea of doing a documentary about the whole hyphy movement and the Bay and so forth. They turned it down. I said, well, let me just start filming it myself. So I put together like a 30-minute cut, came back, showed it to him again. He goes, oh, I like this. We got a deal with Image Entertainment. So as I was building Vlad TV, I was going to his house, and he has a studio in his garage, and me and David Wilson, his editor, would just sit there and start putting all this together. We were editing it all and so forth. We had a deal from Image, and I think I got like $30,000 to do it. And it was cool. It was a release in Oakland at the Grand Lakes Theater, and I used to live right by there. They did like an actual showing, and it was like kind of cool because my parents came. So it was like, let me show you guys what I've actually been doing all these years, since you don't quite understand. So, it was a filled auditorium, a filled theater. Everyone got to watch. They laughed and so forth. And it was cool, but once the dust settled, there was no money on the back end. I got paid like maybe $30,000, and I worked on it for like 4 months, like every day in the studio, day in, day out. And it comes out and it does decently well, but there's no real money in it. $30,000 is, that's not a lot. So that's why at that point I said, well, let me not really focus on the documentary thing, and let me just focus on Vlad TV and on YouTube, and I own that. And I remember talking to Peter, the director, about this, and he goes, that's a waste of time. There's no money in it. You got to work with these film companies. That's how the real money's made. And I'm like, all right, we'll see. We'll see. Years later, me and him are vastly different planes right now. So sometimes you just got to see the future. And, documentaries are still important. There are still very big documentaries, because there was no Netflix back there. Or if it was still a very small company that was just licensing other people's movies. But, with Netflix and Amazon and Hulu and so forth, like there are huge documentaries out there. So hopefully that answers your questions.
No, for sure. It's super interesting. You got time for more questions? Or
I'm here, man.
All right. So something I wanted to ask you, man, that's kind of dear to me. I feel like I'm in this kind of new era of drill music, gangs on social media. Now, you were making documentaries and making content and doing your thing as a DJ before social media was a thing.
Right.
Now, I feel like a thing that I struggle with a lot and that a lot of people come at me for is, oh, you shouldn't be talking about all these gangs. But I feel like you got guys that are posting their crimes, they're posting everything they're doing, their sets, everything on social media for everyone to see. What was it like back then? Was it more of a clandestine thing? Would it have been crazy for me to be just out in 2006 talking about what the Bloods and Crips have going on? Mm-hmm. Tell me a little bit about what it was like back then as far as street rappers, gangster rappers, the people you were rubbing shoulders with. Was it just a complete secret what they had going on in their lives?
I think I was the first media person in hip hop to be called the police, honestly. Like, I don't think anyone was called the police in media before me. Because when I came into it, I was like, I looked at the landscape of hip hop and it just seemed so softball. Like no one was asking the real questions. But then I would watch 60 Minutes, which was like my favorite show, and they would go all the way in. And I'm like, well, why isn't this part in media part of hip hop media? Everything's just so surface level and everyone avoids all these topics, but then they go in the booth and they talk about all this stuff in detail. So I kind of connected the two, and people were not ready for it. And what I was doing was definitely more softball than what you're doing these days. Like, I didn't do these deep dives and so forth, but I would ask people questions about what they rapped about and their backstory. So back then it was really shocking. These days it's not that shocking, right? Because there's a million people doing it, and there's people that do it. Like, for example, you have the Adam 22s that do it to the point of gang fights break out in their parking lot, or the parking lot next to their parking lot. I don't know legally what's going on there, but it's just one of those things where someone is going to take what you're doing and go one step further with it. But I'm glad that I sort of kicked down the door to hip hop media just doing something more than what they were doing before. And this is why it's cool when like Complex makes these like media lists, and they put me higher than some of the guys that I grew up watching, because I feel like they're recognizing that I am sort of the next wave of evolution in media. And although these guys may have bigger platforms or on big radio stations or whatever else, they're still doing it the old way. And the old way isn't bringing in the numbers and the views. Like, I'm a fan of Sway growing up, but I think Sway doing a Tekashi interview is not me doing a Tekashi interview. It would maybe do 100, 200,000 views, but it's not going to do 16, 17 million like I'm doing, because I think I just go a lot harder than he does. But, everyone has their favorites and how they want to do it. Sway has a great career and is probably totally fine with doing it the way he's done it. Me, I didn't want to do it that way. I did it differently.